Hey guys, welcome to my channel Quintessential. It's called Quintessential because my name is Quinlan and my mom and I thought that was a really cute pun. I have been watching booktube videos for many years now, and I thought with all this extra time on my hands because of self-quarantine, I should go ahead and make my own booktube channel. I'm very excited to make my first ever YouTube video, and it is a March reading wrap-up. I read 7 books this month, which I'm really proud of, 2 of which were audiobooks. So the first book that I read this month was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I know this one has been getting a lot of hype lately. I think I'm a little bit late on the hype train, to be honest, but I really enjoyed it. I listened to it in audiobook form, which is especially interesting because each character gets their own narrator, and if you haven't read the book, it's basically about this band that really comes into popularity in the 70s. It's obviously fictional, and it's the story of how they got together and then why they broke up. I thought it was fascinating. It's very character driven, but I really enjoyed that because I love characters. I love seeing the complexities of each band member's relationship with the other band member. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was so much fun to read and very interesting just to kind of see inside all of their heads, and I would definitely give it 5 stars. The second book I read this month was Recipe for a Perfect Wife by Karma Brown, and I got this book towards the beginning of the year when I was really on this kick where I wanted to try adult fiction, and I didn't get around to reading it until March. But I ended up really not enjoying this book, unfortunately. If you don't know what it's about, basically it's told in 2 different perspectives. There's 2 women who are living in the same house but in different decades. There's Nellie, who is a housewife in the 50s, and she obviously has a very traditional, kind of antiquated relationship with her husband. And there's Alice, who is living in the house in the modern day and obviously has a more modern relationship with her husband. But she is recently out of a job and she is trying to write a novel, so she is also kind of exploring what it is to be kind of a stay-at-home wife and to not really be a moneymaker at all in the relationship. And so their stories kind of intertwine when Alice finds an old recipe book that used to belong to Nellie, and she finds kind of notes that were written by Nellie. I felt like it was an interesting concept, but I felt like it didn't really deliver what I was expecting, and to be honest, I didn't have high expectations. I really enjoyed Nellie's point of view. I thought her story was really interesting, and I really didn't like Alice all that much. I felt like I didn't like her that much as a person. She kind of frustrated me. I didn't understand why she did any of the things basically that she did in the book. I felt very frustrated, and I never really felt like I cared about her or her relationship with her husband. I felt like the author really expected us to root for this relationship because they're married in the beginning of the book, but I don't feel like we ever really get to see them being in love or really ever care about their relationship. And for me, when I have a relationship that I care about, I obviously feel like I need the characters to show some emotion towards each other and to really give me a reason to care about them. Whereas in this book, I felt like Alice and her husband were just totally unlikable characters, and so I didn't care really about their story arc, and I got kind of frustrated and I just wanted to read Nellie's chapters. That being said, I would give this book 2 stars out of 5. The next book I read this month was Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. Obviously the cover is so beautiful, look at that. I know Sarah J. Maas can be very polarizing when it comes to people who like her books versus people who don't like their books, and I'm not trying to start any drama, but I really like Sarah J. Maas personally. I just find her stories really interesting and compelling. I love the fantastical element as well as the romance. I really enjoy the romance, and I feel like, for me at least, the romance is not so overpowering that it takes over the story, and you still care about the plot, and the plot is just as interesting and compelling, and she's such a great writer in terms of characters. I feel like she really makes you fall in love with characters and their individuality. That being said, I did find this book very similar to some of the other books that she's written before. I felt like some of their personalities maybe were a little bit similar, but because I love all of her other series, or both of her other series, I didn't mind that at all. I totally fell in love with this book. I finished it in like 2 days, which I think was impressive because it's 800 pages. And I just totally flew through it. I thought it was super compelling. I would definitely give it 5 out of 5 stars. Although I will say, if you do not like Sarah J. Maas, I don't think that you're going to like this book because I do think it's very similar to her other works. The next book I read this month was Love Boat Taipei by Abigail Hing Wen, and I'm not gonna lie, I picked this book up because of the beautiful cover. I didn't really know what it was about, and it sounded fairly interesting. I would say I would give it maybe 3 or 3.5 stars. It was cutesy. I read it right after I read Crescent City, so I was definitely in the mood for a romance. And I felt like this didn't really deliver the romance that I was craving. I feel like I just didn't care about the characters enough. I didn't really get to know them and really fall in love with them, and I didn't really get to see any relationships really progress and really root them on. I feel like it was a fun read because it was quick and just a little bit cutesy, but I do feel like I tend to like my romances in fantasy or in other genres more, just because when you read a book that is a romance book, the problem in the story is always in the relationship, whereas in fantasy books and other genres, usually if there's a relationship, the relationship is usually not the central focus of the book and it's not the central problem. And I do tend to get annoyed at some of the tropes in romance novels, especially the main love interest like already having a girlfriend, and I feel like that's very common. I will be honest, I loved Anna and the French Kiss, so I can't say that I'm not victim to a little bit of that, but I felt like by the time I read this, it was a little bit old, and it was a fun read because it was quick, but I wouldn't reread. The next book, I think you guys will be a little bit weirded out why I read this, but it's Every Patient Tells a Story by Dr. Lisa Sanders. And my mom got this book for me for Christmas, I think, because I want to be a doctor. But I started reading this at the beginning of the year and I didn't get very far because this book kind of actually stressed me out. It's a lot about how doctors diagnose patients, and a lot of it is when they fail at diagnosing them, and a lot of it talks about kind of the errors that doctors make, and that obviously kind of freaked me out because having a life in your hands is a very scary thing, and it kind of put me off a little bit. So I took a really long time to read this book. I kind of had it on the back burner for a long time. I would read like maybe a couple chapters every week while I was reading other books, but I was finally motivated to finish it. And while I think it's interesting if you're into kind of doctors and diagnoses and stuff like that, I wouldn't really recommend this for the average reader. Next book I read this month was also an audiobook, and it was Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid again. After reading Daisy Jones and the Six, I also realized that The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is also by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I was absolutely shook because I loved both of those books so much, and I decided I should probably check out other books that she's written. And so she obviously wrote this one I'm pretty sure a while before she wrote either Daisy Jones and the Six or Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I ended up really not liking it, unfortunately. I felt like the book was telling me instead of showing me how everyone felt and how everyone acted and stuff like that. And while it was kind of cutesy and fun to read, I don't think I would have finished it if I hadn't had it on audiobook and could just like kind of turn it on in the background and kind of have it in the back of my mind rather than really focusing on it. I felt like the writing was not as necessarily advanced as she has been in her other books. I felt frustrated because I felt like the main character's personality was like she liked cinnamon rolls, she had big boobs, and she wore a bun all the time, and I felt like that was her personality. Like she didn't really have much going for her other than that. It was an interesting concept. So basically the story is that this girl, she comes home to LA where she used to live, and she's kind of been bouncing all over the place for years, and she goes out to the bar with her friends one night, and she's staying with her best friend and her best friend's husband. But her ex is also at the kind of get together, and they're on good terms. So she ends up getting a choice between going home early with her best friend or staying out late with her ex. And the story kind of diverges from there, and each one tells a different outcome of what would have happened, and they end up being totally, like, drastically different. And it's interesting to read, but I don't feel like I would really recommend it that highly. I think I would give it probably 2 stars because I just felt like I didn't enjoy it enough to really recommend it to anyone. Okay, so finally, the last, but definitely not the least, the next book I read in this month was Queen of Air and Darkness by Cassandra Clare. So I know I'm very late to read this book, but I originally felt like it had been way too long since I'd read Lord of Shadows or Lady Midnight to read this book and really be emotionally invested in it. But I really was putting off rereading those 2 books because they are monsters. They are absolutely huge, and I was not looking forward to that because while I did really enjoy the series, I didn't love the series so much that I was eager to reread it so soon. So I ended up just looking up a quick summary of the first 2 books and reading this one. I do think it probably took away a little bit from my reading experience because I wasn't fully invested in the characters and I wasn't fresh off of coming from the other books. But I still enjoyed this book. I felt like the story was interesting. I'll be honest, I didn't necessarily care for all the relationships. I felt like some of them we didn't really get enough time to explore, or I just felt like I didn't care about them as much, although I did care about a lot of the characters. I would probably give this one 3.5, maybe 4 stars, although I am really looking forward to reading Chain of Gold this month, hopefully. I'm very excited to read more books this month. It is April 1st, so happy April Fool's Day. And yeah, I would say I recommend very highly House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I had so much fun with that book. I loved it so much. I just feel like it was such a fun, invigorating read. I'm actually in the middle of a reread of it right now, of course, because I loved it so much, and I wasn't ready to commit to rereading one of her bigger series just yet. So I decided to go ahead and reread it. That was definitely my favorite book of the month. And hopefully I'll see you guys next month for another reading wrap up. And I also was thinking about maybe doing like reading vlogs and other kind of bookish related reading videos, maybe some recommendations if you guys want them, although I don't know too many obscure books, so I'm not sure if I would be that much of a help. But please comment down any book recommendations and any videos potentially that you want to see me make. And thank you so much for watching my first video. I know it's not the highest caliber. I'm filming on my phone and my lighting is subpar. It's a mix of natural light and my like normal light from my room. I don't have a ring light. I don't have like a nice camera, but hopefully in the future, I'll be able to get both of those things, and hopefully over time you will see my video quality improve and also just the quality of these videos in general. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.